Welcome, I'm here with Christian Long, Vice President for Education for Canon Design. I'm going to interview him and see what we can get out of him regarding educational design and his experience. Christian, welcome.
Thanks, DK.
So tell us a little bit how you became a school designer.
I was a classroom teacher, high school teacher and coach for about 15 years, and always was curious about how the classroom could actually expand and grow and become a resource for what the kids were doing, not just contain them and not just box them in. So long story short, spent time exploring how somebody could enter the architecture field and really begin to focus specifically on developing learning environments and designing 21st century spaces and places that would inspire kids and teachers.
So tell us a little bit about Canon Design. Sure. And that versus, and the educational team there. Sure. Versus the third teacher, which is, I know a lot about, but some people won't.
Absolutely. So Canon Design is a global architecture and engineering practice and about 70 years old. And we have approximately 1,200 designers located around the world in 18 offices, predominantly North America, the U.S. and Canada, but also in India and China. And while we do a number of different building typologies, the two largest parts of our portfolio are healthcare, so designing hospitals and environments to support the health of human beings, and then learning environments, so schools and universities around the world. So on a really practical level, Canon Design designs and builds the buildings that you see around you. And I'm part of that education team, so focus on schools and universities. Third Teacher Plus is a small studio within our education practice and essentially looks at the future of teaching and learning as a design question. And in many respects, our projects will have spatial implications or might end in architecture. But at the same time, we're really looking at the questions as being, how can we design the capacity for teaching and learning in the future? And so while that may be architectural, it may also end up as experiential. It may be a matter of professional development. It might be a film. It might be a book. So to a degree, we can be a little bit more experimental and also look at a wider spectrum of what it means to teach and learn in the years to come.
So you touched on designing learning environments.
Sure.
What does that mean in 21st century?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the question that everybody in the field of education, certainly the field of design and architecture, are wrestling with. And I think humbly, none of us really know what it's going to look like. We've been challenged to rethink a lot of what allowed us to thrive and to understand schools and design in the past. So we've been challenged because of technology, because the ways that people can connect from across great distances, and maybe even more importantly, with the expectation that learning is no longer an isolated experience, but is now something that involves connecting a wide array of resources and people, and often looking at a problem not through a single lens, but looking at it through multiple lenses and multiple domains, and bringing creatives and problem solvers from a lot of different disciplines together. So when we think of that spatially, we're trying to imagine spaces that inspire collaboration, that allow somebody to explore a problem, not just imagine the problem. And to a degree, that has a lot to do with flexibility. Can we make profound changes? As well as agility, which means can we make just the right change just in time?
Nice. So give us an example of something you guys are working on that kind of epitomizes that flexibility, agility that your team is working on at the moment.
Sure. You know, the questions our clients and partners are beginning to ask are really pushing our thinking. And so on one hand, they're asking for spaces where kids can do 21st century things, or students and teachers of all ages can do 21st century, can have a practice that feels of the moment and going forward. So in some respects, that's a matter of rethinking the science lab. That's a matter of not taking for granted the library of the past. That's a matter of not saying there's a classroom which is a rectangle and next to it's another classroom of a rectangle, etc. But instead, can we have multiple scales of spaces that are available just in time? So what that means in terms of really exploring various projects we're in. At one end of the spectrum, we have a client that has said, we don't want to redesign the entire school, but we want to create a hub where all teachers can begin to push on the boundaries of their classroom. So could we start with a single classroom, and then from there, can we create networks of classrooms? But while we're redesigning the spaces, could we also treat the professional relationships that they have as part of the design problem too? So on one hand, we're redesigning space and we're treating it as a prototype. So a classroom or a studio or a collection of a hub of studios should evolve over time. It shouldn't just be a solution. And on the other hand, we're working with the teachers and the administrators to rethink what it means to collaborate and team up between teachers. And so we're looking at it as an ecology, as a relationship between space and experience and relationships. On the other end of the spectrum, we're working in Turkey, and we've been asked by the Ministry of Education to help them design a new model school for the entire country. So at that end of the spectrum, we're quite literally trying to imagine a new model for middle school students, 10, 12, 13-year-old students, that would not only position them to take on really interesting challenges, to innovate, to problem solve, in many respects to accelerate in the global market, but they asked a second question, and that is, can we design a school that will not only help our kids be more creative and do well within Turkey and internationally, but could we create a context where young women at the age of 12, 13, when they're making that decision about faith and opportunity, can it be that they can be both a person of faith and also be a successful student and not have to make one or the other decision? So in essence, can we design a school for the entire country that is rolled out around the country? But more importantly, can we invite young women to believe that their future can be a merger of both faith and intellect?
Wow. So tell us a little bit around how a young designer would impress you if they came and tried to join your team. What would turn your head?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's sort of two sides of that. One is if they had the particular skills we were looking for, right? And we were looking to bring on a new teammate. What are the kinds of questions we would ask at this moment in time in an interview or while reviewing the portfolio? And the other is, regardless of the specific task, what is the kind of culture of the studio and the team that we need to take on the world's most complicated problems? So the first one's, somewhat easy in the sense that the tradition of architecture, the tradition of building buildings and called schools or whatnot, certainly demands a great deal of expertise in terms of being able to execute. Can you imagine what the client or community wants? Can you begin to sketch and conceptualize and make a concept seem real and tangible? And can you, over time, come to understand how to make thoughtful decisions about not only what the space looks like, but also whether or not it's financially viable for the client and whether or not it lives up to the values. And to a certain degree, to be really blunt, most of that is going to be trained in real time. That's not necessarily a skill set we would expect a young person to come on. What we do expect is an unapologetic passion for the intersection of what our clients, which in this case are educational communities, and what design as a way of solving problems. So we're looking for a young professional or somebody on the verge of being a professional. They don't have to be an expert per se, but they have to be madly curious and passionate about where those two worlds intersect. The larger question is something that our firm's really looking at. In essence, it's not so much what is your training, but what are the problems that you've been a part of trying to solve. So in essence, we're more interested in the projects and teams and experiences that you have committed to than we are in what your grades were or what your diploma says. We're much more interested in young people that want to be part of a very collaborative team. And we want to know that young people, whoever they may be, have a fairly entrepreneurial spirit in the sense they're willing to take risks, but more importantly, they have a spirit of humility where they're willing to be a small part in a larger team. And then ultimately what we're really saying is the problems that our firm, 1,200 people, and organizations around the world are going to have to take on in the future are going to require more than any of us being individually expert. It's going to take a remarkable belief that we can solve the world's most complicated and important problems. And if we can do that with the design spirit, and if we can bring on young people that can be trained very, very agilely over time, but more importantly, they want to be a part of solving these grand challenges, usually the next part's very easy, which is trying to help level them up so that they can feel capable.
Thank you. Give me one thing is getting you excited right at the moment about the future of learning. Just one thing.
I think that we're moving out of a world where knowing the content is how you know that you've learned something. And we're moving into a generation where being curious and being willing to hunt for the question that's worth asking is going to be more and more of importance. So a degree, what excites me when I look at university programs or schools, or even start to pay attention to what young people are doing intuitively, it's paying attention to the ones that are curious and the ones that are being to ask really remarkable questions, is what really makes this moment in time as an educator and a designer pretty extraordinary.
I think you answered the last question in that question, which is what is something a student should be interested in who is designing schools and learning environments.
Sure.
That curious and...
Yeah, and it should work both ways. I mean, they should be incredibly curious about what that community, that city, that university, that group of teachers, kids, they should be incredibly curious about not tell me what you need. Do you need more room, better chairs? What they should be curious about is what does learning look like when you see it at its best. They should be curious about what are the things that make these educators and make these students and make the community care deeply about learning. Likewise, they should be incredibly curious about what's possible when they not only explore education formally and architecture formally, but also what are the other 20 areas that they're looking at, whether it be technology, whether it's how human beings are coming together to share ideas, whether it's about advancements in cognitive brain research, whether it's about whether or not we're going to have farms on Mars, whether how we're going to do microfinancing, how cities are going to operate as sort of platforms for humanity, and sometimes just about how we all have this really common thread that weaves between us regardless of faith and location and geography and even how we speak. So to a degree, we want them, and our recommendation would be we want you to be incredibly drawn to the world of education or learning and incredibly drawn to architecture or design, but we also want to know the other 18 things you're equally curious about. And if we can connect those dots, then we can understand the circumstances by which we should design going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you.